pledge allegiance Yeah, there he is.
Thank you, John. Please feel free to join. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
What would we do without Sandy?
Just a few announcements. We really want to celebrate with the Newburgh Museum. This coming Friday on the 15th, starting at 12 o'clock and running till 6 p.m., they are having a grand reopening. So please take time on that day if you're available to stop by the museum. Jim tells me they've doubled in size, and they are so proud of what they've got. We celebrate with them for what they've done. Next, you've all donated to the Wilson Collection. Many times we've asked for money, and today, to tell you how you can view the Wilson Collection, a tremendous collection, Mike Lynn, he's going to walk this through with you.
Yeah, hello. Just a short announcement. Over the next multiple lunch and learns over the next couple months, we're going to have a table set up over there with a couple of our digitization techs and our consultant, and they'll be there to answer questions after the lunch and learn. And if you've got any questions about it. But if you remember back in, when was it? Was it last August we talked about, or even before, we talked about that we got this collection, a lifelong collection of archives dealing with the Evansville area, mainly associated with the Republic Aviation Plant that was built here back in 1942. And we've successfully digitized the records. We're still adding a little bit to it, but we've got a database. The name of the database, it's a public database. You just go in and type that in. At the table with our archivist, we do have, I got little slips of paper. So if you want to take one of those home as a reference when you get on your own computer. But this is what the front page looks like. And if you would go ahead and bump it. So when you go into search, we've spent a lot of time with a contractor. We put together this database so that you can find various things, not just by typing keywords. We've got, you can look by record type. We've got serial numbers for planes, institutions, different manufacturers, because this database has more than just Republic Aviation. A lot of aviation history and a lot of history about Evansville itself. And it's a combination of the record types, photos, interviews, newspaper articles, different things that's been digitized. One of the things that we've done, made a decision when we developed this database, is there's so much in there that even myself, I wouldn't know where to start. One of the things we did was to try to make an easier way of doing this, is that Ken Wilson had his own sorting mechanism, basically file folders, where he would categorize groups of information, and those would be in the file folders. So we did something we called the Wilson sort, and it's alphabetical here. But what you could do as a quick way to get in and look at something that you may be interested in, you could go down this listing, alphabetical, and if there's something that may interest you, you can click on that, and then you can look at all the records that are associated with that. So this is if you don't know what you don't know, this is a good place to start, especially if you're not familiar with how to go in a database and look things up. Everything that's in there can be downloaded. You can use it yourself. There is a disclaimer though, if you find a nice photograph and you want to download it and stick it on a t-shirt and sell it, you need to ask our permission though, that kind of stuff. You would go ahead and hit it again. As an example, like when you go do a search, you'll come into a screen that maybe have all these different types of things. Okay, go back one, Don. I think go ahead and go forward. I think on here I did a search on test pilots or something. And then these are different records. It's a different variety. Hit it again. Need a slide, please. Did you? Oh, there we go. So like here's an example of what you can get into. So I picked one of these. This is an actual scan of a magazine article from back in August 1943. That it's an aviation magazine from August 43 during the war, and it's a whole write-up of the impressions of the Thunderbolt when it first came out. So this, like I said, this is a small example of some of the stuff that's in there. And then, like I said, over the next few lunch and learns, next couple months, we'll have people back there who, if you got any questions or have trouble, we're adding to the website in terms of some instructional videos and stuff too. And then also one time during June and another in July, we're going to have some public information sessions down at Willard Library. So you can come, we'll announce those. You can come down to that, and then there'll be a sort of an interactive back and forth type presentation to try to help people use it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
One follow-up on the Newburgh Museum. If you wish to know more about the event coming up on Friday, go to newburghmuseum.com. One other thing. I'm going to lead with Pardon Our Mess. You probably noticed the work going on in the yard north of the museum. We have been blessed that the West Side Nut Club has selected the Evansville Wartime Museum as their spring work day. And that's going to happen on this Saturday, 2 days. It's the 9th of May. The museum will be closed. There will be over 100 West Side Nut Club volunteers working inside the museum, outside the museum. I'm not going to go through the list of things they intend to address. It would bore you to tears. But it's not boring work. It's great work. In fact, are there any West Side Nut Clubbers here today? I'd like you to stand. Well, there's one. No, maybe not. But let me tell you, there are at least 3 nut clubbers outside right now. And anytime you get a chance to say thank you to the Nut Club, please do so, because they are a great help to this museum, and we appreciate what they're doing. And Mark, Dr. Mark Brown, please come to the podium, please.
Thank you. Before I introduce that young gentleman over there, up there, you can see a little bit of his bio there, not much. But wanted to say a few things before. Number one, at the front desk, we have bus tours. We've been doing them last summer, we're doing them this summer. I think they cost you $20, we used to charge 10. But they're a bus tour of the city, and Donna Bone and a guy named Jason
Holmes.
over there, he's working a camera. Yeah, I know him, he's a university professor. They give you a tour of the city, but of a pair of areas that World War II was important. They go by the Cervell factory. They go by Republic Aviation and spend some time there. They also go by Fawcett Field and tell you things about those things. It's very nostalgic, but we're going to do it, I think, monthly for the next several months, and you just have to sign up for it. And we're usually overbooked, but love to have you. It's an interesting thing for you to come through. Now, I've just got to go over some of the other things we've got coming up so you can sign up for them. Next, in 2 weeks, Don Simpson's going to talk. He's going to talk. He's been handling disasters in Evansville. If we had an earthquake, we had a flood, we had anything, he's been in charge of doing that for the last 35 years. He's going to talk about what you would do if we had some type of disaster. I don't think I would know what to do, and many of us wouldn't. Then after that is Amy Grove. She's from the Candles Museum, and she's going to talk about art, a lot of children's art from the Holocaust. So I think you would get a lot out of that. She's going to talk multiple places. The next one is Jim Canary. Now, he looks like Santa Claus, but he just retired from the Lilly Library in Bloomington. The Lilly Library has a Gutenberg Bible. It has so much collection. The old man, that old Lilly, was Mr. Collector, and he was in charge of that. And if you ever heard of Israel, he owned the Baltimore Colts, or the Indianapolis Colts. And this guy would go with him on all his buying sprees, and he bought very important nostalgia, sporting nostalgia. So he's a wealth of information. The young lady in the front row here, Steve Salmon, he's from Tell City, but his dad was in the Bataan March, and he survived that, and then he was in the Japanese prison camp all during World War II. And he talked at all the schools in Tell City. He was called Major Salmon. He talked at all the schools for 20, 25 years, but now his brother's going to read the same thing that he talked about, and that will just be so interesting. It'll be a little longer than usual. The next week is West Point, Women at West Point. We have several girls that are applying to West Point from Evansville. I talked to you, the new book out is by Thayer, and it's just an excellent book on the evolution of West Point. Mr. Tising in town had 2 boys that went there. And then I can't go on anymore, you won't remember half this anyway, but we have one of these handouts out front if you forget what I said. But this is a heck of a bunch of good speakers, and we love to have you here. And these people in the red shirts are volunteers. And that guy that just talked in the blue, the guy in the red, the guy in the blue is Mike Lynn. And he's over there, and there's girls over there that will help you search things on the P-47 Republic Aviation. This is probably a one-of-a-kind collection. Mr. Kenny Wilson only worked on it for 70 years of his life, and we got the whole collection digitized. And so I think it's very much valuable for a whirlpool that was an International Star Researcher, and then it was Republic Aviation. So if you want to search something, Kira Long is over there, and she'll help you with that. Thank you for coming, and thank you for supporting us, and we can't thank you enough. Any type of donations would be appreciated. I'm in charge of the donations, and so if you got an IRA that you want to give a little bit of it to, glad to, many of your donors here. But 70% of our budget we have to ask for. We have very little federal money, we have a little city money. But if you think about it, you got a little extra change in your purse, we'd love to have it, and I'm sure you hear that from your preachers and every school in town, but you're hearing it from us too. And thank you for coming today. This is Bill McNeese. Now, Bill's wife was a classmate of about 10 of us. She went to St. Ben's and then Memorial, then Marion College, and she was a nurse that helped in the anesthesia department at Indianapolis Riley Hospital. And he's an anesthesiologist, pediatric. That's probably one of the most difficult specialties you can go to. But he's a tremendous historian, and he's got a brain that's about 10 times bigger than mine. So, okay, this is Bill McNeese.
Well, thank you so much. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you here for the next hour or so. And before I get started, let me make mention, Mark talked about the bus tour. I made a special trip down here last year to go on it. You guys are already here. It's really good, so I'll add some promotion to that. I think it's really worthwhile. Well, with that, and thank you for the introduction, today's focus is on Base Hospital 32. It's one of some 125, 130 base hospitals that operated during World War I. I'm going to start out with some historical context for you, looking at Europe, then the United States, and here in Indiana. I'll talk some on what a base hospital was. From there, I'll move on specifically to Base Hospital 32 and its activities from 1917 to 1919. And then I'll kind of end up by talking about what happened to some of the participants in Base Hospital 32, some of the remains of Base Hospital 32 today, and then leave a few minutes for comments and questions at the end. So with that as an introduction, let us move back in time 112 years to 1914 Europe. So this is a National Geographic map of Central Europe from 1914. And some parts of it are really familiar. You can find Switzerland and Italy and France and Denmark, but their borders are a little bit different. It's Holland rather than the Netherlands. There's some Balkan countries there. Let's see if I can really point here. Yeah, there's some Balkan countries here. There are also some countries that are not there. You don't find a Latvia and Estonia, Lithuania. There's no Poland. There's no Czech Republic. And then there's Germany, and then there's Austria-Hungary. So if we look at that, we can see that Germany is much bigger than what we see today. And if you look at it in detail, it includes the cities of Strasbourg, Danzig, Königsberg, Breslau that are now in France and Poland and Russia. So the borders of a much bigger geographically Germany is different from what you think of today. Austria-Hungary, too, is also much bigger than what we would see today as the separate countries of Austria and Hungary. We can see that is including a much bigger area there, and includes the city of Prague and Vienna and Budapest. And then if we move down below, then we can look at this area of Balkans here. Parts of Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, Greece, bits of Turkey. And notably among this, we can see in this area here, there's the area of Bosnia, and you can see the lettering is the same as these other countries, but it's included in the green of Austria-Hungary. And that's because on October the 6th of 1908, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is kind of down in here, got all absorbed up into Austria-Hungary. Not everyone liked that, including certainly some Bosnians and Serbs. This is an image from the British publication called The Punch. It's from, this is bad. Let's try this again. Try another button here. Much better. Okay. So this is an image from Punch, which is a British publication of 1912. And you can see an image here of stylized images of Great Britain and France and Austria-Hungary and Germany and Russia, all trying to keep under control this boiling cauldron of Balkan troubles down here. And so it was well recognized that it was a problem as early as 1912 and before. And if we come back to look at this stylized image of this Austria-Hungary here, then that bears a striking resemblance to the head of state, Franz Joseph. So he is at the same time the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. In this image, he's He's in his late 70s by 1914. He's 83, 84 years old. He has 4 children, 3 girls, 1 boy, and a younger brother. And the expectation was that his son, Rudolph, would become his successor as king and emperor. Except Rudolph committed suicide. It's a different story, but that removed that one potential heir apparent. And that would put his younger brother in line, but his younger brother, Karl Ludwig, dies of typhoid fever in 1896. And so that leaves this individual, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, one of his nephews, as the heir presumptive. Now, Hoosiers were at least aware of Franz Ferdinand. On the left here is an image taken from the Seymour Democrat, published a newspaper there in 1899. In the image on the right, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is around 50 years old. He has been described as being grumpy, irascible, prickly, and having a very unpleasant personality. So you got a sense of the person you're dealing with here. And as much as you don't think he'd be a person you want to get along with, Franz Joseph, the king emperor, and Franz Ferdinand, the nephew and heir apparent, really didn't get along well at all. And often when they would get together, and they had to every now and then, it really turned into shouting matches. So it was a problem there. Well, among Archduke Franz Ferdinand's official duties was to, every now and then, come down and visit Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so that's what brought him there on June the 28th of 1914. And in particular, it brought him here to Sarajevo, the city here. And it was also where he was assassinated that day. Now, that's an interesting story all in of itself, because it took 2 tries to really assassinate him and his wife. But it was successful. And here you see the next morning's Indianapolis Star. It has headlines of the news of the assassination of the Archduke, and it was with his wife. The first try, it was a series of people that got together to try and do this. The first attempt was with a bomb, and that was kind of a misfire, and it hurt another car, but not the one they had intended. And then the assassination was successful. And what this did was to really further inflame an already tense Europe, as we looked at earlier in that cartoon. So let's look and see how Europe then lined up in 1914. And we can see in kind of I think it's sort of an olivish color there, German Empire, Austria-Hungary. Italy actually comes along later. And they're in the Triple Alliance, and then the Triple Entente has United Kingdom, France, and Russia, along with some of the northern European countries there. And then there's another group of them that are a little bit independent at this period of time. And notably, the United States remains neutral along with some of these other European countries. So that gives you a sense of what's happening in Europe in 1914. Let's see what's happening in Indianapolis. So here, about a month after the assassination, the front page of the late edition of the July 28th news reports that Austria-Hungary sent an official declaration of war to Serbia. So that conflict that everyone was worried about has really started to fester up and become more active. The front page above the fold contains a summary of the latest of the crisis and now the war. It also expresses the hope at that time that hostilities can be contained just to these 2 parties, Serbia and Austria-Hungary. And Britain tries to mediate the differences, but Germany's not real interested in that. Here's from about 2 weeks later, some interesting articles. This is a Sunday morning paper on this day. Berlin, here's Liège has capitulated in Belgium. We can see here that there's other things going on here. Victory cry, victory is heard in Berlin. France notes to be the victor in Germany. There's a series of other things. And then If you get below the fold, you can see that, well, there's some tourists from the United States that are in Europe and trying to figure out how to get back in the midst of everything that's going on. And then down in the corner here is a little mention that the local Serbs have had a dance, and the funds that came from that are given to the Red Cross to help the Serbian army. So what you're seeing here in Indianapolis is on just this one page, some of what's going on in the war, with everyone trying to figure out how to hopefully not see this flare up even more, and then the differences that you're seeing in Indianapolis. You may recognize this if you've been in Indianapolis and ever eaten at the Rathskeller. This is really a German area. Evansville, very like Evansville, had a substantial German population. This is from a 1908 postcard. The building's still around today. We call it the Athenaeum. But if we look carefully here and kind of blow that up, we can see that it had at that time the name Das Deutsche Haus, the German house, recognizing that here there's a lot of German influence in Indianapolis as it was in Evansville. If we look at a map of Marion County from 1916, we can see that Indianapolis makes up kind of a relatively small amount of the entire county. There's an extensive network of both steam railroads and electric railroads. If you get out of kind of the central area, though, there's a lot of rural Marion County out and about. And then if we look up, let's see here, we're about here. This is where you'll see Fort Benjamin Harrison. Still there today, but has since been repurposed. So it was established in 1906, and it's there certainly and active in 1914. Here is a couple of images of downtown Indianapolis. This is the Circle in downtown Indianapolis. Here we're looking at a state capitol here. So that gives you a little bit of the west part of the city downtown. And then if we would look underneath that, so if we come down to look at the next map down here, we'll first see that there's a whole lot of railroads here in downtown Indianapolis. They're just kind of everywhere. And then if we keep looking down, here's Union Station here. We look down here to this building here. Then what we see there is Eli Lilly and Company, pharmaceutical chemists. And Eli Lilly then becomes a very important figure in our story this morning. By late summer of 1914, the U.S. does remain neutral, but the armed conflict really engages many of the European nations. This is the front page of the September 11th Star. It talks about the success of the Allies in virtually pushing Germany back, but at the same time that it's talking about these concerns that are going on and conflicts in Europe, we also see that there's a big throng at the Indiana State Fair. We've got a record mark for the week. So lots going on in Europe, but we're kind of moving on here with the neutrality here in Indiana. There was a major event on May 7th of 1915, the sinking of the Lusitania. This was a British passenger ship that headed out, left the New York harbor, was heading then to Great Britain, and as it was getting close, on its way around Ireland, getting to Liverpool, it was sunk by a German torpedo. There were 128 of the 159 Americans on board who lost their life. Now, Germany really had cautioned everyone about the risk-taking on sailing on enemy vessels, and that's what happened here. Nonetheless, this was really a major factor in moving the United States towards opposition to Germany. Despite this, the U.S. did maintain its policy of neutrality. This is just kind of picking a random day here, July 2nd of 1916. Turns out to be the beginning of the Battle of the Somme. Continued to be major coverage of what's going on. But it's also July of 1916, and so that means that the United States has presidential elections coming up in about 4 months. Here's the candidates for president and vice president of the Democratic Party. These are the incumbents: Woodrow Wilson, president; Thomas Marshall, vice president. The National Democratic Platform describes the successes of the Wilson administration, including scrupulous neutrality. It also talks about the preparedness of the Army and Navy and participation in multinational efforts to keep the sea lanes secure. The other major party candidates, Charles Hughes, Charles Fairbanks, its platform includes a statement: "We desire peace, the peace of justice and right, and believe in maintaining a straight and honest neutrality between the belligerents in this great war in Europe." So lots of similarities there in their platform statements. This is the election day coverage for the Indianapolis Star. It really focuses on national issues. I'll note a couple things with it. It argues that really the only asset the Democratic Party has is Wilson. It also notes that they are expecting that some $10 million, that's about $277 million in today's dollars, is expected to change hands and bets on the outcome of the election. And that police are ordered to prepare to maintain order at the polls. This is the Indianapolis News. It's an afternoon paper. It's a little less partisan here, noting a big turnout. I notice here, where did I find that one? Oh yeah, right up here. I think that's sort of an interesting statement there. The potential of a clean election in Terre Haute. I don't know if that happened or not, but they were hoping. And then we can also see here the image of John Q. Public having made his vote and heading out of the polls, having decided the outcome. Well, if we look at what was happening in Evansville, we see 4 Wilson, 4 Hughes. And if you kind of look through here, if we look on Wilson's side, then we see things like mastermind of science, and wizard of plant life, and friend of labor, and prosecutor of graft. If we look at the ones for Hughes, then it's apostle of hate, the mastermind of the machine, the wizard of higher finance, the disloyal Irish American. So they're pretty clear in what the Evansville Courier was thinking. Here's from another afternoon paper, the Evansville Journal News, claiming to be independent, not affiliated with any political party, and it's thinking, well, it's looking like Hughes is going to be the victor here. Well, once all the votes come in, then it looks something like this, and you can see the Hughes, Fairbanks versus Wilson Marshall for Indiana. It's really close. There's about a 1 percentage point difference. If we look at Vanderburgh County down here, they went for Wilson. If we look for Warwick, and if we look up here to Marion County, went for Hughes. So ultimately, it does go in favor of the Republican candidates. This is an overview from the whole of the state, and you can see that in the red here, Indiana's among them. But the Democratic Party does prevail, and then Wilson and Marshall get another term. Now, I'll point out one thing I think is kind of interesting. We talk about the importance of electoral votes. So here's Indiana. This is 1916. Indiana gets 15 electoral votes. That's more than California. That's more than twice as many as Florida. So a very different electoral map picture of 1916 versus what you would see today. Okay, I'll just put this slide up briefly. It's the image of the 2 vice presidential candidates, Marshall on the left, Fairbanks on the right. In addition to both running for vice president, what do these 2 individuals have in common? Who knows the answer? They're both from Indiana. And moreover, they're both buried in Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. It's an interesting, vice presidents in Indiana are an interesting topic, but that's for another day. So, the U.S. election concludes, Wilson continues in office, and while the U.S. has maintained its neutrality, the European conflict really continues with tremendous ongoing losses. December 16th, Verdun finally ends. Look at those numbers, a million casualties. Really tremendously large numbers. And at the end of 16, Germany offers a peace offering, but it was evaluated by the Allies as being insincere and ineffective. So it was not accepted. And then the cartoon here has Woody, Woodrow Wilson. Okay, let's get this thing up and running to get towards peace. About a month later, February 1st, brings an announcement of unrestricted naval warfare on the part of Germany. It had been limited after the Lusitania, and now February 1st, no, that's no longer the case. Germany will pursue unrestricted naval warfare. 2 days later, on the 3rd, the United States severs diplomatic relationship with Germany, and war appears increasingly likely. Okay, so that gives you a sense of where we are 1914 through 1917. Let's look a little bit about war-related casualties in medical care. This graph shows data regarding troops mobilized and their eventual situation. This is really at the end of World War I, but it gives you a sense of numbers 3 years into the war. And the numbers are, these are millions here, so tremendously large numbers. And then if we look at red, so those who are dead or missing, and kind of orangish, so those are who are wounded. We can see that in looking at these, there's tremendous amounts. If we look over on this side, the number of dead or missing, for most of these, you're kind of in the 10 to 20% of those soldiers not making it back through one mechanism or another. You can't really talk about the United States because they're not really in the war quite at this time. But then you look at something like Serbia over here, where better than a third of those who went into the war from Serbia did not make it back. Now, these are tremendous numbers, and the problems that you run into, they're traumatic injury, we expect that, but there's also a series of medical problems. We can talk about influenza, but not too much today. And then the injuries related to inhaled gases. And so how do we address all these different medical challenges? And this is the schematic of the hospitalization and evacuation system for the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. We can see up here at the top, we've got the enemy territory, and then if there's soldiers up here who need care and treatment, then they're put on litters, they're carried back here to the field hospitals. They're then put on ambulances, they're carried back further stage, and then at this point, from these evacuation hospitals, they're put on trains, and on trains then carried back through stations, and then end up at what are called base hospitals. And so base hospital 32 then is one of these base hospitals. So you can see that it's a while before you've got an injured or sick person here who makes it through the system to get back to the base hospitals. We'll get to this one. So this is a diagram of late 1917, and you can see where there's a whole range of different locations of medical hospitals. And if you look down here, which I don't figure you can read real well, but it talks about things like this is for treatment of gas patients. This is a contagious disease hospital. This is a base hospital. Things along those lines. And then I'll point out this arrow down here, which doesn't point to anything in particular, but it will mean something later. So kind of pay attention to where this is and where this arrow is. So, base hospitals. We talked about where they are in this lineage of how everyone is being taken care of. There's about 125, 130 of them. And they typically made use of medical and nursing staffs from kind of specific geographical areas or perhaps from academic programs, medical schools, to staff that base hospital. And the government develops really detailed descriptions of base hospitals and what their needs are. So here is a little bit. So this is, if you're setting up for 500, these are the things that you need to have. It talks about it will occupy just existing buildings if suitable ones are available. Has about 20 medical officers, 46 nurses, and a range of others with specific details as you see here. The purpose of the hospital is to provide definitive care. And they're only sent on if they require specialized treatment. They can't be provided at the base hospital. And if it looked like there's going to be a bunch of wounded coming in, clear out the base hospitals to provide space for those incoming. The planned hospital preparations are detailed out here. There's 3 pages of medications. This is maybe a 10th of them that you see here. I'll note for you that we've got here, I'm an anesthesiologist, provide me a little opportunity here to talk about that. So here's ether, here's chloroform, and you'll see that there's a little bit of difference here in that if you're a base hospital, then you get more ether. If you're an evac hospital, then you get more chloroform. And then if we move on here, clearly do not try to read this. You've heard the statement that the Army marches on its stomach, and that could be true, but it really doesn't move if there's not the paperwork there. And so what this is a whole lot of paperwork requirements there. And then if you get down to the bottom, you can see where it says, right under apparatus restraint, there's ambulances motor. This is in the miscellaneous area, along with x-ray equipment as needed. There's lots of bedding, gowns, towels to be prepared. You will note that there is, under tentage requirement, nothing required for base hospitals. And the reason for that is the idea for all these base hospitals is that they go to wherever they're going and then utilize buildings that are already there. The Lilly Base Hospital, Base Hospital 32, specifically noted to have included 5 operating room tables, among other things. Everything totaled, lots and lots, but even that doesn't include ambulances and x-ray equipment. So all of this has to be assembled, put together, and then transported. Here's a reminder that I showed you earlier that on February the 3rd, the U.S. severed diplomatic relationship with Germany. A couple of weeks later, this individual, Josiah Kirby Lilly, J.K. Lilly, writes to the Indianapolis section of the American Red Cross, offering $25,000. Now that's pushing $700,000 in today's dollars for the purpose of equipping a base hospital. So it's in one sense a lot of money, but it's a small amount for what it would really take today. But the offer was very quickly accepted. The statement was, though, it's only if the United States goes to war. And it became apparent fairly quickly that this wasn't enough money. And so there was efforts among the population to double that amount, and it was quickly successful. Women of the city working through the Indianapolis Red Cross shop made linens and bandages and dressings, some 46,000 of them provided to the base hospital. And on April the 2nd, here reported in the April 3rd issue of the Evansville Courier, President Wilson speaks to a joint session of Congress, urging Congress to declare a state of war exists between Germany and the United States. And it also makes mention here that there was a steamer that was sunk as it approached Brest, France. That was the 2nd of April when Wilson addresses the joint session of Congress. 2 days later, on April 4th, the Senate votes to declare war on Germany. It's an 82-6 margin. And the early hours of April the 6th, the House concurs. It's a 373-50 vote. Wilson signs the bill later on the day, on April the 6th, and the U.S. enters war against Germany. I'll note that all of the Indiana senators and representatives voted in favor of the declaration of war, and at that point, Lilly's donation is activated. So the planned base hospital has 500 beds. The Indianapolis City Hospital, which is now Eskenazi Hospital, is its parent company. Initially, John Oliver was appointed director, but it became apparent that he really wasn't able to do that because of ill health. So this individual, Edmund Clark, commands the unit and heads up the medical staff after June 14th. There's about 22 physicians and surgeons, dentists, graduate nurses, enlisted men, some civilian employees, and then we saw all the things that were required in the earlier slides. On May the 31st, then the first group of enlisted men arrived, and other things happened. So the physicians go to Baltimore and other places to try and learn from others. The Lilly Base Hospital was officially recognized and then is designated as the United States Army Base Hospital number 32, and I'll talk about using 32 as my usual language here. They actually did get a regular Army guy to be part of this unit. I suppose that was to try to keep things in some level of proper decorum according to the rules and regulations. The medical staff was all identified, and I'll talk about some of those later. September the 1st is a big day. 32 transfers from being an American Red Cross unit to a United States Army unit. The officers and enlisted men of 32 board the train at Union Station, heading off to become a cohesive group, and they travel as far as Fort Benjamin Harrison, about 12 miles. That's as far as I get. And that's where they do their initial training. There's a big crowd that shows up there. Here's some images of some men receiving instruction on regulations. The enlisted men received lectures on a variety of medical topics, and then would travel back to Indianapolis, to the hospitals in Indianapolis, to receive some further medical training, trying to prepare them to be optimal for the care they would provide when they were in the field. The camp itself became something of a tourist spot. There were evening and weekend passes that became readily available. There was time out. Remember, we're pretty much in the rural countryside here. Not exactly sure what kind of a critter they'd caught here, but they caught something. And finally, by November the 1st, the men move out of tents into semi-permanent housing. The officers saw some additions, some discharges, and some transfers. Some went to different areas for some specialized training. And after about 2 months, 32 really felt it was ready to head east and then on to Europe. There were a bunch of rumors that were rampant, and by mid-November, 32 learned with fair confidence that all of that hospital equipment and bandaging and everything else was on its way heading towards, well, somewhere in France. And then on November the 28th, there was reports that 32 would be leaving on December the 1st, but it's probably a rumor, who knows. And on the morning of Saturday, December the 1st, there were lots of people who had gone into town, into Indianapolis, to enjoy the day. And at 10 o'clock, oh no, it's not a rumor. It's the real thing. By 6 o'clock, you need to be on a train heading east. And so that was a really busy 8 hours trying to get everything organized and moving forward. The women, the nursing staff were training separately, Columbia War College in New York, and then they moved from there. There's some coverage of this. This is out of in the Evansville Press. This is out of the Evansville Courier, detailing 3 women who are part of Base Hospital 32. The top one that we see here is the official interpreter, Mary Beatty Herod, for the group. The groups come together in Hoboken. They board the USS Washington for the trip to Europe. This is a German-built vehicle. It leaves for France at 10 p.m. at night on December the 4th. Holds some 8,000 troops. Now, we've mentioned submarines and the concern that we have, and you had to be clearly careful about your traveling when you've got submarines out and about. So there's no lights permitted. Windows, portholes were all sealed. Matches, flashlights were surrendered. White sweaters were forbidden, and everyone receives a life preserver. So the trip saw some rough seals, some great weather. December 16th and 17th, as the ship, the George Washington, is approaching Brest, where it's going to eventually land. Tremendously bad weather, 85-mile-an-hour winds and big waves. There were no major injuries unless you're talking about cups and saucers, and that was a mess for them. And that left then a very treacherous traverse here approaching the city of Brest. And remember earlier I talked about there was a boat that was sunk by submarines here. It was known there's lots of submarines here, and so a very concerning final passage into the harbor. But it was successful, and on December the 20th, the George Washington comes to anchor. It takes a few days to disembark and transfer goods, and on Christmas Eve, the 32 was ready to load onto rail cars and headed for, no one's real sure. But after a travel over Christmas, then the train arrives at a town called Contrexeville, 3 a.m. on December the 26th. There's 2 feet of snows out there, and, well, where on earth is Contrexeville anyway? So, if we come back to this map that I showed you earlier, and if we kind of look at this corner of France here, and we kind of hone in on it, we can see we're getting closer here. We've got Paris there, and we're looking, where on earth is it? Where on earth is it? And finally, you can find it. It's a fairly small town. You can see it's located on a rail line, and that was important. And you can see that's where Base Hospital 32 then alights that early morning on December the 26th. The town of Contrexeville is a well-known spa town. So this is an overview from about 1919. This is a map that I'll show you to you several times here. I'll note that north is kind of that way, so if you're looking for orientation, that's where that is. There are actually 2 base hospitals here. These in the darker color are Base Hospital 32. Base Hospital 31, coming out of mainly Youngstown, Ohio area, are the lighter colored here. But if we look at this, then we can see, okay, we've got up here the railroad station. That's where everyone got off the train. We can see here we have a diagram of a colonnade here. We can find our way up here to a fairly good-sized building up here. That's the Hotel Cosmopolitan, the Cosmopolitan Palace Hotel that eventually becomes Hospital A and looks like this. In the center of this is the establishment hydrotherapy. Now remember, this is a spa town. One of the important features of this is you go to it to take the waters. And this is the building that you would have seen there, and 1919 or so. Here are some previous images to that. So here's a number of folks with their cups and mugs in hand with water, the medicinal qualities of the spa here in Contrexeville. They're taking the water at the source here. Among the others to have taken their water here is the Shah of Persia, the Shah of Iran, visiting and quaffing some water there at the spa. And a fairly important business at that period of time prior to World War I was bottling of this, then sending it out for sale. And this is the Contrexeville bottling plant of 1906. Okay, if we continue to look on, then we can find on our map here the Hotel Providence that becomes Hotel E, or Hospital E. There is located here. This is the casino. You go to the spa, you can't take the water all the time, you gotta have something to do. So this is the casino, and this is the theater that was within the building. 400 plus seats in this theater. So 32 gets there, gets to work. January and February really spends evaluating and working with the available buildings. Remember, France has been a war. These buildings probably haven't been used a whole bunch, and they were mainly for hotels and spa goers. They weren't for hospitals. There's a lot of conversion that had to occur in that 2-month period of time. There were a few patients admitted in January and February, but really the first large number comes along in March. There was also the addition of the Unit R. This is a group of physicians and nurses and corpsmen coming out of southeastern Iowa to try and boost the numbers because of the recognized numbers that originally planned for 500 that was ordered increased to 1,250, so we had to add to that, and that's what happened with the addition of Unit R. So, one thing that happens early on March 3rd, is, and you can read about it here in the Evansville Courier, is that there is a declaration of peace between Russia and the Alliance powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire. Now what that does then is to free up all of the German troops that had been on the Russian front. It opens them up to move back to the French front. And so that allows the line between France and Germany to become enhanced with more German troops. This is a map, and you can see here where the German forces during early, I think it's May, June, July of 18, pushes here. And you can see down here an arrow, and the head of that arrow is about where Contrexeville is. The earlier map that had the arrow, same thing, that's where Contrexeville is. And so you can see that there is, the main battle is going on here. One more slide, you can see the forces push back against Germany here, and this is where Contrexeville is. So, during these months, between about May and Armistice Day of 1918, there's lots of conflict that's going on here, and one of the places then where these injured, wounded gas soldiers are going is right down here to Contrexeville. Now, recall that most of the wounded, ill gas troops are delivered along hospital trains. This is an example of one of them. The first one appears in March 23rd. A couple of 3 days later, more patients. And as the unit develops experience, then it gets some changes as to better facilitate this. Eventually, they become very efficient. And so whenever 32 is alerted of an incoming hospital train, along with the number of patients and their conditions, then the mess officer gets busy preparing extra rations. The hospital officer puts together beds with clean linen. The surgery is alerted. The garage readies ambulances. Medical supply gets ready. And so what happens, these soldiers come in They're dressed, they've got stretchers, they've got blankets, pajamas, and what the medical supply unit does is to match up the number coming in and then reloads that hospital train with fresh, clean, everything that the soldiers had when they were coming. The bathhouse was prepared, and unless the patient was too seriously wounded, they got a bath. That was something they probably hadn't had in a long time, along with clean clothes to wear. Here's a large surgical ward prepared for patients. The supply room contained lots of supplies. Not real clear on how on earth he got to anything in that upper level, but you can see they were well supplied. This is the personnel there at Hospital 1. And if you think back, this is the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Main surgery. There's a room for dressing changes. These patients were divided up based on injury or illness. This is a ward full of orthopedic cases. There were various departments. Here, the ear, nose, and throat department. The person with the smiling face here in the center is Lieutenant Beeler. We'll talk more about him later, but he served as radiologist for the unit. And he's on the right here in the X-ray department. I'll mention Arthur Goodell. Goodell is from Indianapolis. He is actively involved in World War I, but not formally a part of Unit 32, but still is engaged with 32 and presents and provides anesthesia and teaches others about the delivery of anesthesia. More on him in a little bit. If we look at the overall statistics, 5,700 patients, surgical patients, reported 1.14% deaths. We can talk about that a little bit later. But you can see there are really big numbers that come in September and October as the French and the Americans and others are pushing back against Germany. And also recall there's a concurrent influenza epidemic going on here. The medical statistics, about the same numbers, about the same percent death. Substantial numbers of patients in these groups for both influenza and for gas. All of this comes to a close in terms of the hostilities on November the 11th. And some 7.5 months after the first hospital-trained patients arrived to 32. And after Armistice Day, there's a gradual wind down of 32 and transfer of some patients eventually. Here's some images. This is from January of 1919, the officers of Base Hospital 32. This is some numbers coming from the base hospital. Now, this comes up with a 1.2% mortality. There may be some explanation behind that, but strikingly good numbers. You can see that mainly care was provided to Americans, that you'll see here, but there were some others in terms of allies, along with some Germans that received medical care here. About half of the patients got transferred on to other hospitals as their eventual discharge from 32. And then as eventually 32 continued to wind down, by early 1919, all the remaining patients got transferred from 32 to 31. That's the other base hospital, also in Contrexeville. And then there were the process to head home. February 19th, there's the order for personnel to entrain to Nance. The nurses go first, everyone else later in the day. They board the Freedom for their trip home on April the 13th on a projected 10-day voyage, which takes 15. They eventually arrive in New York Harbor. And then on May the 7th, the train carrying 32 arrives in Indianapolis. There's a big event there. Lots of troops. There are other troops along with 32, but clearly it's a major event to welcome all these soldiers and others home. It's covered in the Evansville Courier. Hoosier crowd cheers Many see the big parade. And so this is on the 8th. On the 10th, all the personnel from Base Hospital 32 are honorably discharged, and Base Hospital 32 simply ceases to exist. So it existed for about 18 months, and in that time provided good quality care under challenging circumstances to thousands of sick and wounded and gassed soldiers. And then all the personnel melt back into the civilian world. Let's look at what happened to some of these individuals. Here's some nurses. On the left here is maybe Klickner, and then all the way on the right is Edna Gray. Mamie Klickner, the assistant chief surgical nurse, continues to work in different locations here and in Florida, gets ill and returns to Indianapolis. June Gray, she had been the head surgical nurse for 32. She was very active in the American Legion. This is an image of Lafayette Page. He was an ENT surgeon. He was important in the conceiving of James Whitcomb Riley Hospital for Children, and becomes, on day 2 of the opening of Riley Hospital, he performs the first surgery there. He removes a splinter of a beef bone from the throat of a girl. And he eventually becomes the namesake of the head pediatric surgeon at Riley. Here's an article he wrote, Effects of Intratracheal Medication on Gas Burns of the Respiratory Tract. So he takes this experience that he develops with 32 and translates it on to the medical literature. Bishop Mumford, he served the orthopedic service, founded the Indianapolis Industrial Clinic. Elmer Funkhauser, he provided pathology services, he practiced internal medicine. I don't know if, I was walking around early and I saw something over here about Funkhausers. I don't know if they're same or different, but something we'll have to try and figure out. Bernays Kennedy served as the chief of 32's medical service. He's buried in Crown Hill Cemetery, and if you see his gravestone, it makes note that he served in Base Hospital 32. So clearly important to a number of individuals, even though it was a fairly brief period of their lives. I had mentioned Lieutenant Beeler earlier. He had served as chair of radiology in IU for a number of years. I mentioned Arthur Goodell. He returns to Indianapolis. This is material he has done on the development of tracheal tubes, of oral pharyngeal airway, of the eye movements associated with ether that have been used for decades to teach about anesthesia. Edmund Clark becomes professor of surgery at the Indiana University School of Medicine. An important name here is Florence Martin. She's head nurse for really the whole thing. She receives an award from the French Republic and then dies after working as a practicing nurse until she was 84. So let me close with just a few images here of Contrexeville today. So I showed you this image from 1919. It's still there today. You can walk down the colonnade, visit the shops. They serve some pretty good pizza there. This is the establishment hydromineral of Contrexeville. This is an overview of it. You can see there's a dome structure here, colonnade here, that's over here, and that's still there and in place today. I talked about the theater within the casino. Well, it's still there. It's not an active theater, but by golly, it's an active casino. I talked about the Hotel Cosmopolitan. That's one view of it. This is another view of it. Still there today. And so you can visit it now as the Hotel Cosmos. It's an active hotel. You can take the elevator or climb the steps. I showed you a few interior views. This is the large surgical ward where you could have taken care of patients, or now you can eat your supper. Here is an image of some individuals waiting for the Vital bus. These are all from Base Hospital 32. That building is still there, and you can still wait there if you want to wait for something. That's right. So here are two churches. The nearer one is the English church. The more distal one with the dome on top is the Russian church. They're still there today and still in use. We talked about the French hospital train. There's still train service to Contrexeville, and it's going to be increasing as a part of an Eastern France tourism initiative. This building has had some redoing to it, but it's very similar to the way that it was in 1919. I talked earlier about the bottling of the Contrexeville water, and I'll bring out my empty bottle of Contrexeville water, and indeed national mineral water. The plant now is a pretty impressively large plant on the outside of town, and clearly many times larger than what you would see at that period of time. So this has been the story of Base Hospital 32. It's a story of initiative, organization, of courage, of fortitude that was conceived, established, then operated and disappeared into history over a period of a little less than 2 years. But in that period of time, it played, and the work that it did to provide medical care, nursing care, there was a critical point for the lives of thousands of American soldiers, along with some British, French, and German personnel. And it was clear, as I did the follow-up here, that this experience really stayed with the lives and professional work of those individuals as they moved back to the United States in Indianapolis and in other communities. This is just a preface of a book on Base Hospital 32 if you really get into it. And with that, I'll leave us open to questions and thoughts.
Jesse, we got a question over here. Thank you, Bill. Excellent talk. Who's the question over here? Okay, we got several back there. Anybody got more microphones? We need 4 microphones going. All right, somebody come up and help. I'll ask them while they're working back there. Several things, they need to go to the back. If you talk about nitrogen mustard, this is our Funkhauser, 2 Funkhauser boys. Funkhauser post used to be right by the train station. It was in the old Willard home. The building's still there. But those 2 Funkhauser, that's where the post was, now it's on the west side. Those 2 boys, one of them got hit by nitrogen mustard, died of lung disease, the other got hit by a bullet. But they were both in World War I, and the Funkhauser mom and dad had to deal with 2 deaths of 2 young sons. One was an attorney before he went over there. So nitrogen mustard we used for chemotherapy for Hodgkin's disease, a breakthrough from 1963 to 1980. We stopped using it then because it's what you call an alkylating agent. It hurts too much in the bone marrow. We stopped using it, but it was very good. It was a breakthrough for Hodgkin's disease. Now, I was in a Persian Gulf War in 1991, and we were worried about Saddam Hussein throwing a nitrogen mustard at us. So there was a researcher called Barry Meisenberg. He was stationed in France, and he was going to bring what you call GCSF. It's to bring your white count up in case they dropped the mustard on us. So here it was 90 years later from World War I, or 80 years later, we were still scared of mustard. You're still scared of mustard now. But he talked about the gases, and that one of our local soldiers, and probably more than one of them, got hit by nitrogen mustard gas and inflates your lungs and also knocks your bone marrow down. Okay, next, back there. Comment on that, Bill, anything?
I'll just make mention that I showed that one slide of the article that came out soon after World War I, talking about the experience of taking care of individuals who had inhaled the gases and carrying that information learned there on into civilian care.
Because it would be, the Germans threw it in the air, and then all of a sudden, the troops that were there would change and come back on the Germans. So they had similar problems during World War I, and even, I don't know how much they used in World War II.
No problem, Brett Holmes. Did all the patients get discharged directly back into service over there, or did any of them get shipped back over to the U.S.?
So roughly half of them got transferred on from a base hospital to somewhere else. So the idea was you tried to take care of them there if you could, but if it needed more specialized care or they just needed more room there, then they were sent on to somewhere else.
Okay, we got more back there, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Monty Cooper.
Closer to your mouth.
My name is Monty Cooper, and I actually live in Vincennes. And I was just down here shopping. I went to the VA, talked to my heart doctor. And I come down here to talk to Dr. Brown about something in July, and I find out this is going on. And this black bag, I have a quilt, and it's for World War I, and I'm going, you're talking about World War I. So when these gentlemen get down asking their questions, would you be kind enough to grant me a couple minutes to talk about my quilt?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and finish the questions and answers, sir, and then we'll press on with that. Other questions over in that corner? We got one over here. There's a lady over there. Just to talk about ladies for a minute before she goes to question and have Bill comment on it, but Madame Curie is probably one of the greatest people of the 20th century inventing controlled radiation or controlled radiology. And they called them little Curies. She would take over 200 to the troops. And we use them in the hospitals now. They didn't put on rollers. She had to figure out how to get them to the front line and the back line. And maybe Bill, you could talk about it, but you had shrapnel and it saved a lot of people's lives. And Madame Curie became famous also in World War I, and her husband got a lot more credit than she did.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that. I don't think anyone would be real surprised at that. But you can certainly see, and Raymond Beeler was the primary physician involved with 32 as their primary radiology person. And you can see there was an exchange of information. There was the image that I showed of Dr. Beeler amongst a bunch of French physicians sharing that information back and forth to try and get the information circulated about the use of radiology in a whole variety of different settings. But here specifically for trying to look at broken bones, to look at a piece of shrapnel, it was an early use of radiology in a therapeutic sense here, diagnostic sense here.
I'm Melissa Vanderbeer.
Yep, you are.
What was the nature of anesthesiology then? And also, what did you do to prevent or treat infection?
Okay. So that's a whole different talk. But anesthesiology comes along in the first public demonstration in 1846. And so the medications that were available at that time included diethyl ether, included chloroform, included nitrous oxide, ethyl chloride. So these were inhaled anesthetics that were out there and available. So it was not, certainly wasn't unknown. There were some advances in the understanding of it. I showed you the one slide from Arthur Goodell looking at the various eye signs, the breathing patterns, and that was to try and help. One of the problems is when you get to the right, with ether, when you get to the right depth of anesthesia, it looks a lot like having not enough anesthesia, looks a lot like having not quite enough anesthesia. And so what he developed was a system focusing on breathing patterns and on eye signs to help determine where that was. And that way he could help teach Horman to deliver ether anesthesia because there weren't enough other people to do it. So that information was out there. It got better defined over that period of time. In terms of infection, you probably know more about that than me, but we're talking pre-antibiotics here, so you can talk about antisepsis in terms of various solutions to try and kill that, but you're not looking at a systemic sort of thing.
In regards to sepsis, Lister, I don't know what year he invented, but they did a lot of cleaning the wounds better than they did in previous times. So he was really important in the antiseptic techniques which is used. The second thing, we didn't talk about blood too much, but blood transfusion 1901 or so, but anesthesiologists give more blood than any one specialty, so they are involved in a lot, but the ABO blood type was invented and we knew how to deal with it. Can you speak to transfusions at all and about the aseptic technique that they were using?
I can talk a little bit, only to say that there's not a lot of mention of transfusion in this group of records. Then in terms of asepsis, you saw the dressing changes stations that were there. So there's a lot of focus on cleanliness, the keeping everything clean, dressing changes, because you don't have the antibiotics, so what you're trying to do is you try to prevent infection from happening, and then if it does, you get it cleaned out as best you can.
If you look at timing of wars, the Persian Gulf War, I was in Desert Storm and Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So the war skirmish started in August of 1990, and we didn't go to war till January 10th or so of 1991. That's 6 months of getting all your stuff together. He was talking about, if you look at the problems of World War I, it started in 14, but the United States got in April 6th of 17. But most of our big battles didn't happen to 18 that the Americans got in, because they've got to bring all that junk he's talking about, all that weight, bring all this stuff over, which takes all your supplies. You can't go to war to get supplies. So that took close to a year from April 17 to 18. And can you tell about how much the hospital needs it just to give this service?
Yeah, so what we needed was to get the people together, and this was kind of the notion of base hospital, and Lilly puts the impetus together to get that done in Indianapolis. So we have that organization. There's the women of the community that get together and make sheets and bandages and clothing and everything along those lines. There is a tremendous logistical effort to get that very long list of items together in order to have it whenever you get over there so that you can use it. Then you've got to get the people over there to get all that done and match it up with all of those supplies. You got over there and you were with existing buildings, but buildings that were probably pretty dirty because they probably hadn't been used. They'd not been used for hospital purposes. So you had to do major refits and reuse of those buildings to really make it work. That's why then by March of 18, they're really getting organized, and they start to get trainloads of ill and injured and gassed troops coming in, and quickly they've kind of got to revise thinking in some area, which is what they did, to be able to respond appropriately and quickly. And then that continues on through September and October until the armistice in November, and then so that's like that.
More questions, raise your hand. Go over here.
Steve Brannon, what would you say is one of the most significant advancements made in surgical treatment of soldiers in World War I?
I'm biased. I'm an anesthesiologist. But do let me say that Goodell's eye signs that come out of this really was pretty much critical thinking of how to deliver anesthesia for decades after that. Now, what do you see from there? Well, there's also then, orthopedics, and how do you deal with that? There is respiratory care dealing with the lung injured patient. So there's lots of quickly developed experience that carry on then into the civilian medical care.
Last question.
Hi. Hello?
Yeah,
Okay,
we can hear you.
thank you. I'm a retired nurse, so I'm interested in knowing more about the daily routine of the nurses, the daily census, how many patients they took care of, did they work shifts, how did they coordinate all their care?
So I can give you names of nurses. There was the head nurse. There were nurses who were responsible for the individual hospitals. Within the hospitals, then there were surgical operating room nurses. The patients were divided up into wards to kind of cohort care. And you saw the image of the orthopedic unit there, for example. The ebb and flow was very much like this, because it all depended on what was going on at the front. If there was a big offensive coming in, then you could expect then, not immediately, but going through the various stages, before not too long, you're going to have a whole bunch of soldiers coming in. There was an effort to try and give some advance warning. We've got a train that's coming your direction. It's going to be there in 3 hours. It's got this many patients on it. This is kind of the problems that are going on. And then there could be organization from there to try to do that. So clearly there were important organizational aspects of it. It was not all work. There is at least one image of the nurses who had a little bit of off time and they decided to plant a garden. And I'm sure that there was great pleasure then in hopefully a fresh tomato for someone somewhere along the line.
Okay, three more questions. Three questions for you, and then you comment on all of them. Number one is we've got a World War I museum over here. Gresham was the first warrior from the United States that was killed in World War I, and we have his tombstone there. It's a gold star. You only get a gold star if you get killed. My uncle killed in World War II. You don't want a gold star. So we've got a room all to World War I over there, and you're more than welcome to look at it. Second thing, World War I, that car is General Pershing's car. It's a limousine. It's built to Packard, 1914, 7-seater. Now, Pershing was in that, but also a guy named Eddie Rickenbacker had part of his honeymoon in there. That thing's valued at $1 million for insurance purposes, probably worth more than that. But Eddie Rickenbacker flew a plane like that, 20 kills in World War I, and also run the Indianapolis 500. He was in town here because he's the president of Eastern Airlines. So it's a lot of history for Evansville. And then the last thing is we talked about how long it got ready for the Persian Gulf. That's a 7-month period of time to get ready. And you're talking probably longer time for World War I, 10 months. But if you look at World War II, half this museum's on World War II. If you look at it, President Roosevelt passed through this town in April of 1943 to look at what the United States did. It was building the industrial infrastructure to win the war. We had to make the stuff before we sent the stuff over there. So it's about a 1.5 to 2-year lag for World War II. But you can't work as an anesthesiologist or surgeon without support. We've got Dr. Blanc over here as a surgeon as well. You can't do much when you don't have anything. And maybe you can talk about how, in this recent war, what's his name getting into, Trump, he hadn't got anything going because he's doing those jets, but if he really had to bring the troops over, he'd probably a 2 to 3 month delay getting things over there. But the logistical nightmare, and I'm sure they forgot things and missed things they had to improvise.
Well, I'm sure they did. What they did have was a really thought-through list of these are all the things that you need. As kind of a personal example, one of the things that I do as an anesthesiologist is to take care of patients, mainly in an operating room setting. But sometimes I have to provide anesthesia for patients outside of the setting. So that means that working with nurses and others, we've got to be sure to take everything with me from here to there. And that's what everyone in Hospital 32 had to do. There had to be this forethought to try and be sure that they had everything there. Now, I will say that anesthesia in some ways was simpler there. You're dealing with fewer agents, fewer monitors. So from that perspective, it is less stuff that you have to carry with you. But you've still got to be sure that you got everything there to provide the care that you're doing. It's a tremendous logistical issue that was accomplished by the people of 32.
Okay, we've gone over. I'd like you to ask him any questions, and then you can talk to the quilt gentleman afterwards. You can come up here and he will show his quilts. And then any other questions, I'd like to have you in 2 Thursdays from now. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.